The sun dipped low over Westfield County, Texas, setting the fields ablaze with amber light. Cicadas buzzed, horses neighed in the distance, and the scent of fresh hay hung thick in the air. Out here, life was meant to be simple. Honest. That's why I bought this land, 40 acres of solitude, passed down from my grandfather to my father, and then to me. My name is Thomas Rourke, and for 10 years, I had built a life out of dirt, sweat, and resolve on Rourke Acres. But peace doesn't last long when greed has eyes on your land. Rourke Acres lay a good half-mile from the nearest neighbor and another mile past that to the edge of Westfield Meadows, a pristine development governed by a notorious HOA. They had their fences, their bylaws, their neat hedges, and their beige conformity. I was none of that. My land was sovereign. Free. Or so I believed. It started small. An envelope, plain and unassuming, slipped under the barbed wire gate one morning. No stamp, no address, just the letters WMHOA emblazoned in bold black at the top. Notice of noncompliance. It cited violations I'd never heard of: improper fencing height, unapproved outbuildings, excessive livestock. It demanded a $2,500 fine. I laughed, stuffed it in the wood stove, and got on with my chores. I wasn't part of any HOA. I hadn't signed a thing. The nearest official boundary of Westfield Meadows ended well before my fence line. But the letters kept coming. Each more threatening. Each more absurd. Fines grew. The last one claimed I owed over $20,000. I drove to their HOA office, a gray monolith in the center of their manicured suburb. The receptionist looked at me like I tracked mud across her white carpet. "Sir, your property falls within our newly adopted jurisdiction map," she said, smugly pushing a color-coded pamphlet across the counter. "That map is a fantasy," I snapped. "My deed goes back 3 generations. No HOA. Not now, not ever." She smiled, as if I were a stubborn child refusing medicine. "You can appeal the fines at the next compliance hearing, or you can pay and avoid further action." I walked out. Days passed. Then came the trucks. It was dawn when I heard them, low, rumbling engines bouncing off the hills. I stepped onto my porch with a mug of black coffee and froze. 5 black SUVs, 2 flatbed trucks, and a white cargo van, all kicking up dust as they barreled down my private road. They stopped at the gate. Men in tactical-style uniforms emerged, each bearing a patch: WMHOA Security Enforcement. They moved with precision, cutting the lock off the gate and driving through as if they had every right. I ran toward them. "Hey, this is private property. You have no right to be here." The leader, a lean man with sharp cheekbones and a hard glint in his eye, stepped forward. His name tag read, Bryce. Kenneth Bryce. I didn't know it then, but that name would haunt me. He handed me a document. Notice of Property Compliance Enforcement, Section 9.17 Emergency Action Protocol. It looked official. Stamped, signed, paragraphs of legalese. But there was no court seal. No county approval. "You can't enforce this. I'm not under HOA jurisdiction," I shouted. Bryce didn't flinch. "You refused compliance. We are authorized to remediate violations at your expense." Before I could protest further, they fanned out. One team headed to the barn, another toward my farmhouse. They pulled chainsaws from their truck beds. One fired up a bulldozer I didn't even see arrive. Within minutes, the red barn that had stood for 70 years groaned as its walls were torn away. My livestock scattered. Chickens screamed. A sow broke through her pen, bleeding from a splintered leg. My shepherd, Duke, barked and charged, only to be kicked to the side. I raced toward him, only to be tackled by 2 of the uniformed men. I screamed, cursed, fought, but it was no use. They smashed the porch steps, tore down the shed, and dismantled the coop. One man even began stripping the wiring from the side of the house. 3 hours later, they were gone. Just gone. Silence settled. The kind that follows a tornado. I stood in the dirt, knees bloodied, shirt torn, holding Duke in my arms. His leg was broken, but he was alive. The barn was rubble. The farmhouse looked like it had been shelled. And my land, my sanctuary, was in ruins. No warrant. No court order. No justice. I called the sheriff. "Thomas," he said, tired, too casual. "We got a call about the disturbance. But I'm told it was an HOA action. Civil matter. You'll have to settle it in court." I stared at the receiver. A civil matter? They destroyed my livelihood. They hurt my animals. They trespassed, vandalized, and left me broken. And no one would help. That night, I sat by the remnants of my barn with a bottle of whiskey and a .45 pistol on my lap. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I planned. The next morning, I took photos. I cataloged every shattered beam, every broken gate, every hoof print in the mud. I spoke to neighbors. A few had seen the trucks, a couple even recorded from a distance. One old rancher, Sam Murphy, gave me dashcam footage of the convoy arriving. I drove to the county clerk's office and pulled every zoning record, every jurisdiction map, every HOA document I could find.
What I found chilled me.
5 years ago, Westfield Meadows filed a boundary expansion with the county. On paper, it included several surrounding properties, but none had been notified. My land, somehow, was included in the newly incorporated zone. They called it annexation. I called it theft. That's when I knew this wasn't just a rogue HOA playing sheriff. This was something bigger. Organized. Corrupt. And if I wanted justice, I'd have to tear it all down myself. The days after the raid blurred into one another, but the fire inside me burned sharper than ever. I drove from courthouse to courthouse, dragging Duke around in the cab of my truck with his leg in a brace. Nobody wanted to get involved. One lawyer took my money and promised to look into it. 2 days later, he refunded the retainer with a brief note. Conflict of interest. It was clear. Someone powerful was pulling strings. Late one night, I was at a diner just outside Westfield, nursing bitter coffee and studying HOA bylaws when I heard her voice. "You planning on taking them down or writing a memoir about it?" I looked up. A woman in her early 40s stood beside my booth. Sharp eyes, weathered denim jacket, recorder hanging from her neck. She introduced herself as Clara Mendoza, former real estate attorney turned investigative journalist. She'd written for Texas Truth, a digital magazine known for exposing corporate corruption. I didn't trust her at first. But then she pulled out her phone and showed me a story she did on an HOA in California that used forged permits to run illegal surveillance. "They play dirty, Thomas," she said. "But I play dirtier." We teamed up. Clara went through every document I collected, cross-referencing deeds, comparing signatures, matching county stamps. She found what I missed. The annexation paperwork was filed using a loophole in the zoning law, one that required no formal vote if a development was designated a district of unified planning interest. The catch? That designation required resident approval. Clara discovered that every approval signature had been forged. She pulled county assessor records and discovered that Westfield Meadows HOA president, Kenneth Bryce, also served as the CEO of a private development firm, Bryce Corp Holdings, the same company that had recently secured federal grants for suburban redevelopment. They wanted my land. They wanted it cleared and developed, but they weren't going to get it without a fight. Clara started documenting everything. Video interviews, drone footage, satellite imagery. She wrote the first blog post titled, "The Siege of Rourke Acres." It spread like wildfire. Rural communities across Texas began sharing it. HOA victims from Arizona, Utah, and Nevada reached out with similar stories. We started a campaign, #FreeRourkeAcres. Local TV picked up the story. Then a national outlet called. But pressure brought consequences. One night, Clara's car was ransacked. Her hard drives were stolen. They left a note on her windshield. "Back off. Last warning." A week later, my well was poisoned. I had to put down 3 goats and a calf. Duke got sick, but he pulled through. We reported everything to the sheriff. His answer? "Unless you catch them in the act, there's nothing I can do." Clara looked me in the eye. We take this to court. Federal. Fraud, trespass, destruction of property, impersonating authority. The whole shebang. I nodded. I was ready. We hired a real legal team out of Austin. They specialized in land rights and racketeering. We filed a federal lawsuit against Bryce, the HOA board, and Bryce Corp Holdings. The legal storm was coming. But we weren't just fighting for Rourke Acres anymore. We were fighting for every homeowner silenced, every rancher pushed out, every family that thought they were safe because they lived outside the line. And as the court date approached, we uncovered one final, damning piece of evidence. A former HOA secretary had reached out to Clara. Her name was Karen Marks, and she was ready to blow the whole thing wide open. The courthouse loomed like an old sentinel, all weathered limestone and worn wooden doors that had seen decades of pain and justice. Inside, the temperature was cold, not from air conditioning but from tension. My case, Rourke versus Westfield Meadows HOA, Kenneth Bryce and Bryce Corp Holdings, had ignited something bigger than a land dispute. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the benches. Angry homeowners, activists, and curious law students leaned into every word. Clara sat just behind me, her notepad in her lap, eyes sharp. She had been my lifeline through all of this, and now she was a vital witness. I could feel Duke's absence at my feet, the phantom pain of his limp a reminder of what had brought me here. Jeremy Haynes, my attorney, stood to deliver our opening statement. His style was calm, almost conversational, but underneath there was a coiled fury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today because the powerful believed they could trample the powerless. Because a man who never joined an HOA, who was never given a fair hearing, had his life destroyed under the illusion of regulation. Mr. Rourke's home was invaded, his land trespassed, his animals injured, his structures razed, by an HOA that had no legal right to touch a single inch of his soil. And worse, they did so for profit. He turned, gesturing toward me. This is a case of fraud, of abuse, of a private army used to enforce illegal claims. And we're going to show you, piece by piece, how they thought they'd get away with it. The defense attorney, Ronald Mears, was all shine and smug. A navy blue suit, pocket square, that hollow charm honed in a dozen boardrooms. Mr. Rourke's situation is unfortunate, he began, but not malicious. The HOA operated under newly filed jurisdiction expansions, as permitted by county policy. Mistakes may have been made, but they were procedural, not criminal, not worthy of punitive damages. He smiled as though it were all just a simple misunderstanding between neighbors. The jury didn't buy it. The real battle began when Clara took the stand. She was steady, every word deliberate. She walked the court through forged signatures, retroactive filings, and how the so-called annexation of Rourke Acres had no legal grounding. They counted on nobody noticing, she said. They used predatory, quiet filings, forged signatures of consenting residents, and manipulated boundary maps after filing deadlines had passed. These weren't accidents. This was targeted. She produced copies of internal HOA emails, obtained legally through a whistleblower, where Bryce and others referred to Rourke Acres as low-hanging fruit and discussed neutralizing resistance. One message simply said, "Knock down the house. We'll settle the dust later."
The courtroom gasped.
Then came the surprise witness, Karen Marks, former HOA secretary. She stepped into the box with visible nerves, wringing her hands. Haynes approached her gently, like someone handling a live wire. "Ms. Marks, you were present during multiple board meetings. Can you tell us what Mr. Bryce's intention was with regard to Mr. Rourke's property?" Her voice cracked but gained strength. He said it outright. "We make him miserable, he'll sell. Then we split the development profit." He said it in front of everyone.
Gasps again.
"And did he have the authority to sign enforcement orders?"
"No. But he signed them anyway."
We were told to look the other way. Haynes produced a document she had helped him obtain, a demolition order, dated and signed, with my parcel number clearly listed. The order was dated 2 weeks before the supposed boundary expansion had even been filed. Next, the defense tried to claw back control. Mears called 2 zoning officials, county employees who danced around every question. They offered vague statements about technical jurisdiction overlap and community interests. But Haynes was relentless. So, you're telling this court you didn't verify whether Rourke Acres was legally within Westfield Meadows' domain before approving destruction of private property? I don't recall the exact process. No further questions. Then came the moment I both dreaded and welcomed. My turn on the stand. I kept it simple. No theatrics.
Just facts.
I bought that land to build a future. I didn't bother anyone. I didn't throw parties, I didn't build condos, I didn't drill for oil. I just lived, worked the land, raised animals, built with my own hands. My voice faltered as I described coming home to a smoking ruin, Duke bleeding on the porch, and the emptiness in the barn where generations of family tools had stood. They thought I was some nobody farmer without the means to fight back. And maybe I was, but I had the truth. The court was still. I caught a few jurors wiping their eyes. But the defense had one last card. Bryce himself. He walked in like he owned the room, smirking at the crowd, adjusting his expensive cufflinks. He made his way to the stand unbothered. Mears began. Mr. Bryce, were you aware of Mr. Rourke's claim to be outside the HOA? I was. But there were ambiguities in the zoning. And your intention? To protect the aesthetic and investment interests of the community. His structures didn't conform. Did you personally order the raid on Mr. Rourke's property?
No.
I delegated operational decisions. Haynes stood. Mr. Bryce, did you stand to profit if Mr. Rourke left the property? I may have, yes. But that was not the motivation. Haynes walked slowly to the evidence board, lifting a printout of an internal Bryce court memo. This document values Rourke Acres at $2.2 million post-development, dated 1 month before the destruction. It says, and I quote, "Development readiness contingent on acquisition from holdout." You are the CEO of Bryce Corp. Did you write this memo? Bryce hesitated. Yes. You stood to make over $2 million by removing Mr. Rourke. No further questions. The jury looked furious. Closing arguments followed. Mears. A mistake, yes. But not malice. This isn't worth millions. Haynes didn't bother with theatrics. He just pointed to the photograph of me, standing in front of my crushed barn with Duke beside me. This wasn't a mistake. It was a business decision. A deliberate erasure of one man's life to make room for another condo complex. You can't unburn his barn. But you can send a message to every board, every developer, every shady HOA. Not anymore. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I sat there, staring at the knot in the old courtroom bench. Every creak of a floorboard sent a jolt through me. Then they returned. The foreman stood, a wiry woman with steel in her eyes. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Thomas Rourke, and award punitive damages in the amount of $2.7 million.
Gasps.
A hush. Then applause, immediately silenced by the gavel. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. The first full breath in months. The aftermath was swift. Federal agencies opened investigations. Bryce Corp lost contracts overnight. A week later, Bryce was arrested for conspiracy, racketeering, and fraud. The HOA was disbanded. The county issued a public apology. Clara stood beside me on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing. They came for the wrong man, she whispered. No, I said. They came for the right one. And I wasn't alone. Rourke Acres still bore the scars, but justice had been served. And the fight wasn't over. The dust had settled on the courthouse steps, but for me, the real reckoning was just beginning. Winning the lawsuit wasn't a neat, cinematic ending. It was a battle won in a war that still smoldered across the country. I spent the first weeks after the verdict in a haze. Some days were filled with calls from journalists, victims, or supporters who'd seen themselves in my story. Other days, I just walked the property, trying to feel peace again, trying to remember what it was like before the raid. Duke followed beside me, his limp still present but lighter. The new barn was almost finished. The house repairs were slow, but steady. But the scars on the land and on my mind didn't heal with wood and nails. Then came the letters. Hundreds. From all across the country. People like me, homeowners and farmers, who had been bullied, fined, harassed. Some had lost everything. Others were still in the thick of it. Their voices, long silenced by fear or lack of money, now found strength in mine. One envelope changed everything again. It was from a woman in Mississippi. Widow. She and her late husband had bought land outside the boundaries of an expanding gated community. After he passed, the HOA forged a covenant, claimed she owed back dues, and filed to foreclose. She lost the house. Clara read the letter and slammed her fist on my kitchen table. It's not just an isolated abuse. It's a pattern.
A machine.
This isn't just fraud. It's systemic. Coordinated. We contacted legal experts and discovered there was precedent to bring a federal civil rights case against a network of HOAs for violating constitutional rights under the guise of private governance. But we needed more.
So, we launched the Land Rights Coalition.
At first, it was just Clara and me along with Jeremy Haynes and a few other lawyers sympathetic to our cause. Then came the donations. Then the whistleblowers. Former HOA officers, realtors, even clerks who'd watched documents being forged and residents strong-armed. One by one, we built a case that spanned 5 states. Public support surged. Hashtags trended. State senators took interest. One called it the private governance crisis. But we also attracted enemies. There were threats. Clara's nonprofit was hacked. My rebuilt shed was burned to the ground one night in early spring. They left a spray-painted message. Silence is peace. I called the sheriff. This time, a new one, Sheriff Diaz. Honest man.
Tough.
He sent deputies to monitor the property and opened an arson case. For once, the law was on my side. The DOJ launched an investigation into over 30 HOA organizations operating in similar fashion to Westfield Meadows. Bryce Corp was just the first domino to fall. One board president was arrested for extortion. Another for falsifying legal documents. Then came the most shocking arrest. A state zoning official paid off to alter jurisdiction maps. The more the truth came out, the more the media wanted in. Clara and I were invited to testify at a congressional hearing. Standing in front of that room, looking into the faces of lawmakers, I remembered what it felt like to be powerless. They call it civil oversight, I told the chamber. But when private organizations enforce public laws without public accountability, we stop being a free people. We become tenants in our own homes. That testimony led to real change. A bill was introduced, the Homeowners Autonomy and Land Rights Act. It aimed to enforce transparency, restrict unilateral annexation, and create a federal oversight body for HOA governance. It passed committee unanimously. Back home, I finally found a sense of purpose again. Not just rebuilding, but fighting for all the others still caught in battles they didn't ask for. Duke and I would walk the pasture at sundown. The new coop buzzed with chickens. Neighbors came by more often now, bringing casseroles, checking in. I was no longer the hermit at the end of the road. I was the man who'd stood up when no one else would. And Clara? She stayed. At first, just to wrap up the coalition. Then to write her book. Then, because she said, I've seen enough fake people to know when I meet someone real. One warm evening, we sat on the new porch, a breeze whispering through the cedar posts. She looked over at me. Do you ever wish it hadn't happened? That they hadn't come? I thought for a long time.
Some days, yeah.
But mostly, I'm glad they picked the wrong man. She smiled. You weren't the wrong man. You were the only man who could have survived it. The sun dipped behind the hills. The land, my land, glowed with that same golden hue it always had. But it felt different now. Hard-won, but free. As the stars came out, I raised a glass of whiskey and whispered a silent promise. To never let them do it again. To never be silent. To always fight for the soil beneath my boots. Rourke Acres had been broken, but I rebuilt it stronger. They came to erase me, but I became a symbol. And in the end, They taught me something priceless. You can't govern a man who's willing to lose everything to protect what's his.